building a vision for pro-Deo lawyering, and I hope that doesn't alienate our paralegal friends. I hope that you can take a lot from these conversations as well. We're really blessed to have you here with us. So my name is Ted Oswald, and I work with Christian Legal Clinics in Philadelphia. I'm a staff attorney, and I've been on the job since October. So I don't know very much yet, but I've been very fortunate, very blessed to have the freedom to pursue things like this that bring Christian practitioners, lawyers, paralegals, students, even undergrads here that we have joined us together to try to envision what pro-Deo lawyering might mean. And I've been thinking about this moment for the last 2 months as we decided we were going to do this conference. What I would say, how I would deliver the talk, struggling to find a balance between challenging you and encouraging you, between grace and duty, between sacrifice and affirmation. And I hope what I'm sharing with you are words that God wants to whisper in your ear this evening. This talk is meant to provide that vision for pro-Deo lawyering, if it is even anything new, I'm not sure it is, and provide some vision for this conference as we move ahead. A framework and ideas for you to carry with you through the rest of this weekend. I don't know if I'm up to that task. I'm very nervous about this. Again, being a lawyer since October, I don't have a lot of experience to draw upon, but so it's with a lot of humility I hope to come before you and share. I don't feel like my ideas are coalesced. These are kind of different thoughts that have been bubbling up from my life and from my experience. And so I really do want this to lead to more questions than answers tonight. I think it needs to do that. Some of what I'm saying, it might be flat out wrong. And so let's talk about this. Okay, we're going to have some small group time after this to hopefully explore this a little bit more. So pro-Deo, it's been on some of the flyers, different things that we put out there. It means for God. And what I really enjoyed learning is that in days gone by, I guess in Europe, where legal practice started, or traditional legal practice as we know it, pro bono service, or pro bono publico service, was referred to as pro-Deo. If you took a case for free, or for next to nothing, in order to serve someone who was poor or in need, it was pro-Deo. That you were doing it in service to God. And I think we've lost that vision. I think I've heard Christians talk about, well, do pro bono and pro-Deo. I think they're the same thing for us, really. We know that when we serve the least of these, it's like we're serving Christ. We're going to talk about that idea some more, but that's pro-Deo. And I think that really informs this idea of maybe conceptualizing both the way we do our work and the work that we ultimately end up doing. So my vision, in short, there are a lot of words that I'm gonna try to unpack. You're gonna be familiar with a lot of them. Some of them maybe not so much, and we can hopefully flesh that out. So my vision, in short, is that I believe pro-Deo lawyering, again, if it is even something that needs to be distinguished, is something that should be incarnational, something that should be sacrificial, something that should be prophetic, spirit-led, countercultural, and love-filled. And to kind of frame my talk, there are 2 questions that I really want to try to discuss with you this evening. The first is, what kind of lawyer would Christ be? It might be kind of an absurd question to ask, but I think it's one that can be really significant in our lives. It might highlight some ways that we might become more like Christ in the profession. And then the second lawyer is what kind of, second kind of question is, what kind of lawyer or paralegal or student or law student is God in me leading me to be? If you're a believer, the Spirit is dwelling in you. It's transforming you. It's motivating you. What kind of lawyer is the Spirit encouraging you to be, or whatever your professional role is? It's an immensely personal answer to that question. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to this, and so we're going to talk about that a bit more tonight too. So I'll start with this story to frame this. So it was in the middle of my 2L year, second year of law school, a Friday night. I'm sitting with my wife. Friends recommended a YouTube video that we should watch. We watch it, and by the end of it, I am considering dropping out of law school. I was at that point. was saying, is this a decision I need to make this very weekend? Should I drop out of law school? And the talk, it was a half-an-hour sermon given by Oscar Murray, a Kenyan pastor, at the Urbana Student Mission Conference in 2009. And he expounded upon the famous passage in Philippians 2, and I'm going to read it in its entirety, so bear with me. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It's Philippians 2:1. So again, this Kenyan pastor talking about Philippians 2, why is this going to make me think I need to drop out of school? The talk was focusing upon the incarnation. That's what that passage is all about, the incarnation. And I've encountered in recent years discussions of incarnational ministry or missions. It's a view that encourages us to pattern our lives in ministry after Christ's own, or rather his embodiment in human flesh. Oscar Murray noted 4 of Christ's movements or shifts that come that leap out at us from Philippians 2. And he tells us that God could have sent a king, a Messiah in any form. It could have been a wizened old man. It could have been every expectation of what we would think a king would be. Even though it was 2,000 years ago, it could have been beamed across TV screens. God could have invented TV screens just so people could be told that this is the Messiah coming. It could have been written in the sky. He could have spoken it to every single person's mind, but he didn't, which was a very unique way to bring salvation to the world. He incarnated human flesh, Jesus Christ, born as a baby in backwater Nazareth, to grow up in a culture, a particular culture, with particular beliefs, a faith, to rise up in that, and to, after 30 years, not when he was 10, some kind of prodigy, after 30 years, to enter into the world and bring that message of salvation finally. There was great patience there. Now, everything about the incarnation is counter to this world and its values. Everything about how God chose to bring freedom from the bondage of sin. And I mentioned 4 of those movements, and this, I'll try to, I'm going to go through them quickly, but we'll come back to them. This is what was really significant for me, this frame that he talked about. The first was a movement from a place of ultimate pride to one of utter humility. He's God. He's God. Come down to be a helpless baby, to utterly poor parents. The passage says that he humbled himself. He did not consider equality with God something to be used to his advantage. Similarly, I say it again, he's God. From a place of great power to a place of utter powerlessness. That he, and over the course of his life, that he was obedient to death, even death on a cross. So again, born into poverty, an infant, ultimately a refugee who had to flee to save his life, and killed on the cross. He moved from a place of great privilege to a place of great poverty, taking on the very nature of a servant. We know from his life that he was someone who had no place to lay his head. Similarly, his disciples, he told to take them back from their journey, but to rely on the people that Christ was sending them to. And then a place of great order to one of utter chaos. From the harmony of heaven to the brokenness, dysfunction, and sorrow of this world, the sinfulness of this world. So, a place of pride to humility, a place of power to powerlessness, from privilege to poverty, and order to chaos. And so you might still be saying, why? Why did that shake you up so much? Why would I quit law school? I realized if I'm to pursue Christ's incarnation as a model for my life, then law school, and I think ultimately the profession that we swim in, are encouraging me in the exact opposite direction of every single one of those movements. The profession subtly and overtly tells me that I need to leave the chaos at the margins and move towards the center, the halls of power in 30th floor law firms. It tells me that if I'm a successful lawyer, I'm going to wear decadent clothes, not like this, drive a luxury vehicle, have an expensive home, and a safe neighborhood. Basically, I will be privileged because I deserve it. All the hard work. Paints the ideal as being the partner. Maybe the president wants a lawyer. The partner, elevated above all of your associates, accountable to no one, unless you basically kill someone or get found out for having it. Basically, the idea that you're losing your soul in the process of gaining the world. It tells us to go that route. And find it's a profession we go, it's about pride. A pastor we met at the National CLS Conference in inner city Chicago. He said that I apologize too much to be a lawyer, that I've got to get over it. That admitting defeat, we know it's a weakness in arguments. You have to argue your side and win that argument in order to save face. And so many questions arose. I asked, why was I in law school? Well, my answer for why I was in law school, I wanted to serve the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. That's what I said in my application essay. To this day, that's why I say that I went to law school. But I had to ask, was being there, or wanting to be a lawyer, being involved in all this mess, was it for my own pride and sense of superiority? Was it to be forever identified, reborn, with those 3 letters tacked on to the end of my name, ESQ? To be the center of attention, to have control, status, power, self-righteousness. Was that why I was going? Is that really where God wanted me to be? That's the question. And if it wasn't, I realized I had to be willing to drop out. That's what shook me up then. So obviously I did stay in law school, and I did become a lawyer. And the result of that, and Barb was alluding to this, is that there's a tension between these values that we're immersed in, and yet still wanting to humble myself and give myself away in love, trying to be a light in law school and a profession, pointing others to Christ. So exposure to these ideas, the incarnation put this way, got me thinking more about Christian lawyer. And I've totally lost track of time. It's a long talk, so bear with me. So this is a problem. This is a problem for me as I was looking at this. So if we're going to be Christian lawyers, and not merely lawyers who are Christians, who wear Christianity like clothes that we can put on and take off, we want to emulate Christ himself. That's my opinion. That's kind of my suggestion to you. So emulate Christ and not merely Christian lawyers. We can learn from Christian lawyers, absolutely. But that's not the pinnacle. I think a lot of times we aren't challenged enough because we kind of put that as the end in mind first, just the Christian lawyers that are around us. So then that leads me again to the question, what kind of lawyer would Christ be if he was a lawyer? It might be an absurd question. But I think it's like, for those of you who have taken torts, first year law class, you think of the reasonable person. You hold this legal fiction up, this imaginary kind of average reasonable person against which you can measure conduct in a certain instance. It helps us to assess whether someone's maybe done something negligent or in forming a contract. So we use that a lot. And so I'm basically saying, instead of the reasonable person, or maybe the reasonable Christian lawyer, we kind of we put up this idea of a new legal fiction of kind of Christ as the lawyer, to kind of consider things, to maybe shed some light on this. So that immediately starts to bring to mind some questions. It's kind of like the WWJD bracelet for us to wear. It's like, what would Jesus' practice look like? Who would his clients be? Where would his practice be located? What types of matters would he take on? What causes would he support? How would he spend his time? It's kind of fun to think about. I could be wrong about this. It might be kind of a faulty idea, but I asked someone at the National CLS Conference, I said, what kind of lawyer do you think Jesus would be? And he laughed at me. He said, Jesus wouldn't be a lawyer. Maybe so. And so if you get caught up in kind of this question seeming inappropriate to you, someone else suggested it a different way. Maybe you can ask, what kind of lawyer would Christ want his disciples to be? Fallible humans to be. Maybe that is the more appropriate way to ask. So there are a few things, I think they've been brought up in different ways in Barb's talk, but I want to maybe mention them again. So I want to follow Christ's path. Maybe you say that too. I think we do. I think that's why we're here. But we can't forget that that's a difficult road that is marked with suffering and sacrifice. It's a path to the cross. We know that. One that requires us to take up our own crosses, lose our lives, and sacrifice all. That's hard. That's a hard teaching. So why are there any Christians then? Well, because we know that path, despite the suffering that's involved, there is unsurpassable joy in knowing Christ and being invited to play a part in the kingdom-building mission he calls us to. I think along those lines we can say the shalom-building mission that he calls us to. And so, I'll jump through some of these things. So we know that Christ was a prophet. I just want to remind you of that Christ is a prophet. Speaking truth to power, calling people out of their sin to fresh repentance, and many times and instances to cease oppressing the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, that God cares so much about. We know that he cared greatly about justice and mercy. I'll read it again because it's a wonderful passage how Christ announced his ministry in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed and declare the year of the Lord's favor. That's how he inaugurated his ministry. We know he is about peace and reconciliation, shalom, become the Prince of Peace. That we are, through him, we are able to be vertically reconciled through relationship with the Father. We know that he brought the Spirit to dwell in us, that he tore the curtain in the temple when he was crucified, the dividing wall between us and God. And horizontally reconciled. Barb mentioned 4 ways, I'm just mentioning 2. So I'm glad she fleshed that out a little bit better. But Ephesians 2:14 says, for he himself is our peace, who has made the two one, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. He's able to work reconciliation where the rest of the world can't fathom. And then I also want to draw attention again, which I think is vital for us, to his care and concern for the least of these. We saw that he'd hang out and show great care to the sinners, to malcontents, the sick, the disabled, so I've heard it said recently, the lost, the last, and the least. He brought to the center of his attention those whose society said, nah, we don't really want to hang around you, we don't really need you, we don't particularly like you. He ate with them, drank with them, while having a certain word for those that were on top. Matthew 25 is an incredibly sobering passage. And I just want to remind us of it. It's where Christ is talking about separating the sheep from the goats. And his followers are going to say, but Jesus, we're your followers. We're your followers. And it eventually comes down to Christ saying, whenever you fail to help any of my people, no matter how unimportant they seem, you fail to do it for me. And the people that ignored the least of these, he's going to send them away. Now that's really sobering. I mean, it's hard to kind of reconcile with the message of grace, but again, it's his followers that he's saying this to. He's saying, you didn't know me because you ignored me when I was walking among you on the streets, walking past you in need. So there's a lot of tension that comes with that. I think it's good for us to sit in that for a bit. So, all right, so I'm still, maybe you've lost the wider vision. I was talking about Christ there. Now I want to hypothesize what Christ's lawyer might look like. These are some my hypotheses, if you will. So I think Christ, if he's a lawyer, he's going to care about the souls and salvation of his clients as much as their legal issues. His practice would be ministry. He would represent the marginalized long before the rich and powerful, and so would probably be located on the margins. If he prioritizes ministry to the widows, orphans, outcasts, the homeless, prisoners, and the forgotten, I want to ask, why wouldn't I? Maybe that's bleeding over a little bit into the application section. But it strikes me that the rich and powerful can have the pick of any lawyer, and nearly every one of our peers is going to be willing to run after them. But who's going to go to that voice, maybe down the street, that's saying, I need an advocate? Who's going to do that? If not Christian attorneys. Maybe people who want to pursue self-righteousness, maybe they'll step into the gap. But I get excited about thinking of being there, of more Christian lawyers stepping up and hearing that call. Okay, I got off track. So, Christ is lawyer. So he would do justice, opposing those who oppress and take advantage. Be deeply troubled by the suffering of the least of these and act to deliver them from those who oppress them. I think he would prioritize peace, probably be about mediation, counseling, reconciliation, preventing problems before they break out, of healing relationships before there's a fracture that causes a legal dispute. He probably wouldn't spend all his time with people that are just like himself. He may go to the most despised people in the most dangerous places. Remember Christ talking to the Samaritan woman caught in adultery. Whoa, way out of bounds, cultural. But he was there. He was there. And at the same time, even though his ministry focused so much on the rejected, of course he still spent time with the powerful. Though they were often known as sinners, people like the tax collectors or Pharisees, the rich young ruler and centurions, but he still had love for them. He loved them while offering them a call to repentance. And I think that's maybe a part of the vision for if we do end up in, say, a law firm, what that might look like for us. I think he would certainly mentor and disciple others, probably lawyers and non-lawyers, people inside and outside the profession. I think he would have, this would probably be much higher up on the list if I ranked these 5 points. He would have a robust inner life with the Father. We often saw Jesus going off to pray in solitude, to basically rejuvenate himself after being spent ministering and preaching. So I think as a part of that, busyness would necessarily be kept in check for Jesus as lawyer. I think he would choose something simple. So Jesus was homeless, as I said, no place to lay his head. He lived with less and told his disciples to give away their second coat. Warned the rich young ruler about the perils of materialism, keeping him from being able to enter into heaven. I think he'd be a prophetic voice. His words and deeds would speak to the kingdom that is here but not yet fulfilled. A prophet to the profession and wider society. He would shame the things of this world that perpetuate the culture of death and sin, while living in a way that shows others what shalom looks like. I think that's one of the most important things. So again, this is kind of my exercise in holding up that Christ is a lawyer standard. I might be wrong. I'm totally willing to admit that. It might be, as I said, kind of a silly exercise. I might be coloring my own passions and desires and assumptions about Christians in the world and coloring Christ in this. I totally accept that. But I think it's still telling when you look at Christ to try to apply that. I think it's still a useful exercise. So, wait, I know some of you might feel uncomfortable with this. I actually hope they might feel something with this. Maybe you're asking a question. You're asking me to repattern my life off after some kind of imaginary standard. And ultimately, no, that is not what I want. A good friend mentioned to me that there is a fault in that thinking. And that fault is that it limits God's own creativity to use us for his purposes. If I say that, every Christian lawyer has to be about these things at all times, I think that's a mistake. I think it's limiting what God can do in our lives. He can use us, we know, as salt and light in unsalty and dark places, and he wants to spread us out through all of society. If I say to you, you should follow this career path, and here's exactly what I just said, He's going to blow that arrow of thinking up in seconds and uses people in ways that we couldn't think of. So the important thing to take is that Christ is living in us, remember that. So I'm not Jesus. I'm a Caucasian American in 2012. He's God, a Hebrew, a little bit older, 30 years old, totally different culture. It's even more radical if you could change anything else. Say it's your woman who's a lawyer. Automatically, this vision of what Christ might be as a lawyer falls apart. So what I want to say is that we have to remember that Christ is in each of us. He's moving, he's changing us. But we have to remember a verse like John 14:12, where Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing. And they will do even greater things than these, because I'm going to the Father." Greater things than healing the sick? Miraculously? That's amazing. He's telling us that, right? So if you kind of said, this is my checklist, the way I'm going to be self-righteous, the way I'm going to prove myself, by following this path that using the standard that I laid out, I think it's going to be a mistake. Like I said, we're looking at this as the answers for you are going to be individually tailored to you. And so that's why we have to be receptive to the Spirit moving in us, stirring us, convicting us. Because if you don't, I'm just keeping a new law, a new religion, a new legalism. You don't need that. All right. How are you guys doing? How are you guys doing? I'm about halfway through. Is this too much? Can you handle another half? I don't know. I'm seeing a lot of tired faces. So. I could keep going. You can probably tell. I'm really excited. Okay, well, I'll try to get through this idea a little bit faster than maybe I would otherwise. I think, so when we're asking, the second question is, what kind of lawyer, paralegal, law student, undergrad student is God in me leading me to be? And I think this has been helpful for me thinking about it this way. So I think there are three ways that we can, three areas that we can think about how faith is intersecting our lives. And for me, that's kind of the personal, the procedural, and the substantive. And I hope we don't get lost in just those words. I hope that they have some worthwhile meaning. The personal applies to everybody across the board. There's nothing unique for lawyers, law students. It's what's generally applicable. That as followers of Christ, there has to be a confession of faith, repentance stirred by recognition of our sinfulness, a robust relationship with the Father through prayer and study and pursuit of Christ-likeness. We know in the personal sphere of your life, you don't want to lie or cheat on exams, study on the Sabbath, steal, look at porn, drink your troubles away, get high, sleep with your girlfriend, kill. The discussion of these things, it's not all unique to lawyers. And you'll hear that on any Sunday in church. Or the same message preached. So I guess as I'm talking about the personal sphere, there's so much discussion that I've seen about looking at how we integrate the personal and the vocational, or the job life. How these two things there's integrity between them. That you're not one person at work, one person on Sunday. And so I think actually talking about the personal, I'm glad Barb already talks about this. Probably the most important thing that you could take from this talk is that deep need to recognize our sin and weakness. That deep need to recognize that we have wandering hearts, that we are easily led astray, that we are prone to wander. We have to accept that we are weak. And I think that's one of the hardest things in the law, is that you're trying to put on the clothes, you're trying to put on the Rolex, you're trying to impress the people around you. You're trying to hide that weakness. And I don't blame you for that. But I think we might start to believe it ourselves and forget how dependent we have to be on Christ. Or else that alienation of our sin is going to creep in. We can't forget that. And God, I said, God, how is God in me changing me in my work? He can't work on us unless we're connected to Him. Unless we keep coming back, unless we keep picking up that cross and walking with Him. He can't transform us. So I feel like if you were God's heart in your own life, it's going to spill over into every other facet. In some ways, I can stop the talk right there. If that's happening, if God is transforming your heart, you are going to be motivated to these things that we're discussing, caring for the least of these. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And so we constantly have to be reminding ourselves of our nature, that we're sinful and only Christ can deliver us from our bondage. So keep that. Carry that with you. Of course, there's joy in grace. I'm not focusing on that, but I want to focus on the weakness. I want to emphasize that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my story. So I said that there's the personal sphere that we want to think about, applicable to everybody, and then I think that is kind of the procedural aspects of our work. It's wrapped up in kind of how we go about doing our vocation. It's really easy to debate these issues. This is where I see Christian lawyers talking about these things most often. Is kind of the how do we do our jobs? How does Christ, or being a Christian, affect that? And I think we like to dwell there a little bit too much without lunging forward and getting into some meaty thoughts that need to be thought of. So it's kind of the practicalities of legal practice. So how would Christ do the deposition? How would he deal with conflict in the workplace? Are you going to try to screw your opponent, take advantage of a client, represent a guilty one, do divorces? I've heard it said, this is one vision, that being a Christian, that it's like treating the Bible as a supplement to the rules of professional conduct. That you're setting the bar a little bit higher for yourself. And I do believe it's important to reason out those ethical implications of our faith in law. Absolutely. But I think we can't stop here. We lose out if that's as far as we get, just thinking about how it changes how we do our job. And so I leave that to, I mentioned the substitute. I think that can be a prickly area because I think a lot of people don't want to delve into it because it has the potential to shake your life up. So for me, the substantive is saying where I have choice in my work, not everybody does, where I have choice in my work, I'm going to be concerned about the things closest to God's heart. If I can use my life to open up more space in my life, maybe it's my full-time vocation, maybe it's a part-time, I'm opening space in my schedule in order to serve the least of these. Why would I want to do that? Why wouldn't I want to refocus areas of my life around these priorities? So my story, it'll be a brief one. I'm an incarnational legal fellow, very aspirational name for what I do. Incarnational legal fellow at Christian Legal Clinics in Philadelphia. The idea was to take these things I'm talking about and to say, what's it look like for me as a new law grad to move into the neighborhood and to try to be a lawyer as Christ would. So I live about 2 blocks from here. I've lived here for about 2 years now, so I've been here for a while already. To attend church in the neighborhood, to work in the neighborhood, our offices are right around the corner. To try to love neighbor, to try to spread the gospel, to be Christ in the midst of the neighborhood at 4225 North Franklin Street, where I live. And this has been really cool. It's been a real trip. There's been a lot of good. I mean, even something like this, bringing you all together, this is fantastic for me to see. I worked a lot to make this happen. And seeing you here tonight, I'm truly blessed by things like this, opportunities to interact and share. But it also hasn't been an easy road. There's a lot of revisionism. I don't just want to paint a cherry picture. My sin is constantly creeping in, all through law school, in fact, all through my previous. And so many times I think it shows my sin. I've seen a soft heart hardened and spiritual fruit in my life just dry up as I'm studying for exams or planning for the bar. The idolization of grades and success overtake my spiritual life as it has all the way up through school, from maybe not kindergarten. Then I think I'm still probably just wanting to have fun. But as I moved along, wanting that affirmation of good grades, and that becoming the thing that drove me in law school. I've seen ugly racism creep up inside me. Obviously, I'm from California, suburban California. Living in this neighborhood, I'm a little out of place. And despite my desires to see reconciliation, to see new relationships spring up, that are supernatural because Christ is present? Well, unfortunately, racism gets in the way. I'm too nervous to say hello to my neighbors. Not all the time, sorry. I'm not just a horrible. but that maybe it's latent racism. It creeps up to the surface, and it separates us. It's on my neighbor's part. They're like, why is this guy here? And then on my part too, saying, oh, they don't want to have a relationship with me. I'll just not look at them as I walk past. Maybe it's not racism. Maybe it's just different. Lots of different things that can be creeping in. I choose to retreat into my home. I choose pointless diversions. Hulu, Netflix, Redbox. I should have given them all up for Lent. Pointless diversion, needless distraction, busyness over contemplation and love. Oh, always happens. And as I'm standing before you, I'm not trying to say that I've got it worked out. I do not. I've seen a lot of grace and joy with these movements in my life, though, of these relocations, these movements that are trying to be patterned after Christ. And it's been an 8-year transformation of really taking me from the suburban shell that I grew up in and kind of shattering that, and God stretching me, bringing me out of it. But I still have so much learning and growing. But God, He helps me overcome some sin, which is a blessing. And then I unfortunately see others that I didn't recognize. My anger, my impatience. Oh, marriage brings that to the fore. Not because I'm sorry, my wife's in the back of the room. It's not because she's horrible, but it's a reality. You got to confront the difficulties of hurting someone regularly and of your selfishness. I used to feel that when I was feeling that this way, I could just go up into my room and close the door and feel like I'm still a great person. Now I have to hash it out. I have to confront that. It's a never-ending process of returning to Christ to help me to do the faithful work to build His kingdom. And boy, that is ambitious, because it's so easy to get mired in that sin, to not even be able to move past that to these greater aspirations of wanting to be used by God to change the world. All right, so that's page 7 of 10, so we're making progress. So there's a phrase I really like by a theologian. I haven't even read his book, but I encountered it elsewhere. And those of you that were Jesus, Justice, and Poverty, I'm kind of stealing it from that appropriately. Prophetic imagination. It's to dream of a world that God is building. To think of what our world in a state of shalom would look like. And to work towards that vision. I often look around and I believe that our profession has lost its imagination. And I think that a lot of Christians working in the law have lost that imagination. Have we become so complacent that we are no longer salty to the world around us? This conference is supposed to be a place for us to get together, to dream together, to imagine together. To imagine a different profession in the world, a different way to do our work in our lives. I think necessarily, I don't know if it's going to be how I describe it, but I think how we do what we do should look different. Maybe it's that there's just the fruit of the Spirit evident in our lives. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's the substance of what we gravitate towards and want to work in. I'm not sure. But I want to imagine ways that Christ can work in us. I want to let Him do that. And so some challenges, some kind of general challenges. To students, I want you to think about, I'm glad you're here. I want you to think about these things early. How can you structure your life now to stay faithful to your first love to Christ? It's much easier than course correcting later. You think about the ship that sets off from New York or whatever heading towards Europe, and it's even a few degrees off at the beginning. By the time it's supposed to reach its destination, it's miles away. And coming back to maybe some of these things that we've talked about, wow, it's going to be a lot of time. And so maybe then there's a lawyer who, maybe you're challenged. Maybe you're encountering some new ideas, and I hope that's the case. And wondering if your job, maybe like me in my second year of law school, if you're saying, is this just something that God is calling me to exit? to move on, to do something else. If that's the case, pray on it. Talk to us tonight. Be open. He may be calling you to reorient your life, but you don't just want to be reactionary. You want to know what he wants. He may want to keep you right where you are, but change your heart. He might want to use you to reach your coworkers where you are. So keep that in mind. And I think then there's maybe the lawyer lost in paralegal, what fill in the blank, maybe feels confident and excited where they are with Christ. That they're able to follow him in their current job or career. Maybe they're, I'm kind of picturing an elder lawyer here. So maybe someone who's a pillar of their community, a parent, a church elder, a Sunday school teacher, and they feel like they are right where God has called them. And that is a beautiful thing. And my exhortation to you is if you're also being a prophetic voice in those midst of trying to bring others into this shalom, this mission of shalom. Well, actually, I should phrase it. If you aren't doing that, I encourage you to do that. I picture another story. So delving further back before law school, the experiences that God gave me, He returned me to the suburban church I grew up in. And while in that midst, I was able to bring others along with me on this journey. And so if I had instead said, no, I only want to go with people that are talking about justice, what I'm going to do with justice, I would have likely been disobedient. It would have been the easier path to take. But choosing to stay put in that place, it provided opportunities to open eyes. And it's the same thing, the prophetic imagination of speaking truth to people, bringing them out of maybe their complacency or their sin. That can happen in giant law firms. As toxic and as difficult as an environment as that is, I'm not a huge fan, but that can happen. And God can use you in really profound ways. But of course, I'm digressing, unfortunately. And we gotta get through this. So I talked about, kind of the student who's starting out, the lawyer who's really questioning, the professional who feels confident where they are, that it's where God's called them. I want to encourage everybody to ask how you can sacrifice more. Maybe it's time, maybe it's money. I kind of gravitate towards the materialistic side of things because I think that's an issue for a lot of us that are kind of in this profession. But ask how you can sacrifice more. Maybe tonight, maybe in your groups. So the other thing I want to say is, just so we don't drop it, there was that talk that Oscar Maria, pastor, Incarnation. I want to go through that again. Christ's path from a place of pride to humility, of power to powerlessness, privilege to poverty, order to chaos. And my feeling is maybe another way to challenge you, if you're not pursuing that path, or let me take it back, sorry. If maybe some of those things you're actively aware of, that you are pursuing Christ, maybe you have a blind spot there. And I'm going to ask you to actually close your eyes as I ask a series of questions. And maybe that are along these lines. And I hope that maybe one or two might leap out at you as a way, an area where you might be able to follow Christ more closely. So as you make more money, how will you give more away for the sake of the kingdom? And as you grow in power, how will you find places in your life to give power away? Making yourself more dependent and uncomfortable so you fall towards God. As you find yourself isolating yourself from the pain and suffering and struggles of others, how will you boldly enter into situations to offer compassion and alleviate others' burdens? And as you look at your friendships, how will you find new ones with people who don't look, talk, and believe as you do? And as you become more prideful and independent, how will your heart remain raw, motivating you to remember your baseness and need for Christ? My next series of questions is maybe for those of you who are here, who are completely on board with dedicating your life to works of justice, mercy, compassion, love, peace. You've got a vision for the way the world should be. But as you become more about doing justice rather than loving God, how will you correct the imbalance? As you repent of the sins you realize, how will you continue repenting for the new ones you discover? As you become more certain of your correctness about the way things should be, how will you remain soft and humble? And as you become more righteous, how will you fight self-righteousness and attribute any goodness in you to Christ? Those are the questions. As I said before, there's no one-size-fits-all vision for answering what Christ living in you looks like lived out in the world. It's tailored to each of us. And so now I kind of enter the last phase of the talk, and it's mercifully a short one. I wanted to try to bring up some concrete ideas for moving forward. I think to hopefully prime the pump, to stoke the prophetic imagination. Some of these might not be surprising. Some of them might be useful to you. So I would encourage you, this is my own bias, again it might be incorrect, to pursue jobs that let you work with, for the least of these, to benefit from those relationships. These are sparse, I understand, because of funding. So you might have to split your practice. What if I charge those who can pay to subsidize my work with the poor? I think that's a really exciting idea. That if you can't find a way to dedicate it all, like I said earlier, that you're finding a way to open up gaps in your schedule, that you're finding freedom to do that, so that you can still build in that service that's so vital. Again, I think of countless other people in the world, countless other jobs, where you don't have that freedom, where you can't structure your schedule. Like any number of things, where you can absolutely serve God, being a plumber, a mechanic, a teacher. And you can be faithful to God. You can be rightly related to Him. It can be a calling for you. So I don't want to say that everybody has to, again, pursue a certain path towards serving the least of these. I don't think that's the case. But I think it's a vital part of what we do still. So I think a part of it, a lot of times I've heard lawyers or people in the field complain about being caught up in a type of practice and where they have to take a case that they really don't feel comfortable about. And in that sense, I really get excited about the prospect of being a solo practitioner or starting your own firm, so that you can retain that autonomy, so you don't have to feel like you're compromising. I mean, don't take cases that you feel aren't just. I mean, maybe there's economic necessity, maybe you have to. I don't know, but if you have that freedom not to, I think that's a great place to be. Being that solo or starting your own firm, so you can call some of those shots. Now, I also get excited about this idea. We don't have as many kind of seasoned lawyers in the room as I'd like. But what if we all said, let's get together and start a Christian firm here in the city? One where the maximum annual salary for anyone is $60,000, or take your pick what dollar amount. And we're going to say that 60% of our time goes to making profit, and the other 40% goes to being prophets by choosing to represent the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. At the same time, we aspire to excellence in our service. We do the best job that we can as advocates, but treat and respect our clients the same, whether paying or not paying. It'd be a place where older lawyers can mentor young ones, create those opportunities for young lawyers that want to be part of that shalom building mission. So that's one idea. A few more concrete ideas. What if instead of saying I need to make at least $60,000, if you say that, you said maybe instead I can take a pay cut. I can make $30,000 for the sake of the gospel. We see lots of other professionals do that. We see doctors. We see teachers at this school. At this school, the teachers make $20,000 a year. It is their calling. It is their mission field, being in these classrooms. Why shouldn't lawyers follow suit? Well, we say loans. Yeah, for a time. For a time. I think you have a lot of freedom today to be creative with how you deal with your loans. I don't want to go into that, but between income-based repayment and 10 years of public service, getting your federal support as a legal missionary, you can come work with us. Why not? Start legal ministries elsewhere doing that. We see tons of other professions where business is mission. Businessmen are raising support to go and start businesses in other countries. Why can't we do it as lawyers? Maybe you can be bold in retirement. It's really exciting for me. My parents right now, my dad's a pastor. My mom and my dad are in India. They just arrived today. They are looking at pastoring, my parents are 57 each. They're looking at pastoring a new church in Delhi. They have no experience serving in another country, but they traveled, but no experience doing something quite like that. But they're saying, in these good years that I have left, I've ignored God's call to the least of these for too long. That's how they feel. My coming along and being a rabble-rouser in my family, being a prophetic voice in my family, has been a great blessing to them. It's led them to places where they feel like they've acknowledged parts of the gospel that have been far too long, I don't want to say ignored, but just not brought to the fore in the seeker-friendly suburban church I was in California that I grew up in. So I am excited that they're visiting this church and looking at I can't believe it's God's movement that's brought them this opportunity. And it'd be hard for them to be there, but I am really excited about it. So the point, I think the point got lost in my little story, is be bold in retirement. If you're further along, consider how you can do really creative things with your time. So tithing of money is obvious, and time. I like this idea of a graduated tithe. It goes something like this. Ron Sider, I first read it in a book from him, he's going to be here tomorrow, so say I need, whatever the poverty guidelines are, I should know that, Say it's depends on the number of family members, maybe it's 20,000. And so I say, I need 20,000. Every $1,000 I make above that amount, I'm going to give a larger percentage away to the church, to ministries. So it's essentially capping the amount of money I have after a certain point. Just recognizing that I can live with less, that I can live simply. So I also said tithing of time. And we know that the professional, in the ABA rules, the American Bar Association rules, that the aspiration for pro bono service is 50 hours a year. 50 hours a year. And we know most lawyers don't do that. What's interesting is that 50 hours amounts to about 2.6% of a normal worker's annual hours, working 40 hours a week, 2.6%. And most lawyers probably work longer than 40 hours a week. So you kind of say, that's 50 hours, 2.6%. What if that was, like, we tithe 10% of our money, or maybe, we use that figure. What if we tithe 10% of our time as a church? Or 25%? Or again, we think creatively so that we can maybe get away with 50% of our time, structuring our practices in such a way. So my last point in this area, again, I appreciate you guys for it. I do. Maybe you're a tax or a corporate lawyer. You want to work in policy or around issues concerning the environment or real estate or intellectual property. Whatever the field, I want to encourage you, you can find those linkages that let you care for the poor, marginalized, and oppressed, the lost, the last, and the least. Help people with tax returns, starting small businesses, creating just laws, environmental justice efforts for disadvantaged communities, patents for cheaper vaccinations. That is something I love about the body of Christ, is I am not gifted with numbers. My friend Daniel Popcave over there, he's going to be a tax lawyer. He's working on those issues now. Someone comes into our clinic, I have not the slightest idea where to start with them. But Daniel is able to shepherd them through the problem. I think that's a beautiful thing. You can find those linkages, and I encourage you now, even now, if you've declared a concentration or if you're a student trying to figure out what you're going to do in law, that you try to think critically about how you might build that into your expertise that you're trying to foster. All right, so I've reached our conclusion, thankfully. I want to look back on my life and And I would hope that you would say the same thing. That looking back at the end, I didn't just follow my peers in meaningless wealth, consumption, and comfort. I'd like to be able to say that I spent my life pursuing Christ, living sacrificially, as he did in a way that spurred the values of the world, choosing life over death, to fix broken relationships, doing justice, loving mercy, walking humbly with my God. I want to be able to say that. And when I meet Christ, I want him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. I don't want to hear him say, depart from me, because you ignored me when I was hungry, when I was crying out, when I was in prison, longing to be visited. You don't know me. I want him to greet me as a friend. So remember, love God with all your being, and love your neighbor as yourself. Obviously summed up easily, but very, very difficult to do. And I go back to acknowledging your weakness, your sin. And I just want to encourage you to return to Christ. Return to Christ. Return to Christ. Let him transform you and the world around you.